The door of the lecture hall creaked, and a gray head of Yosef Moisevich appeared in the doorway. Merciful gods, colleague, why are you still at work? The sunset is in 15 minutes. And you still have to drive to the countryside. Pavel Viktorovich, my dear fellow, what an unnecessary risk, hurry up. The aging dean, as always, looked impressive. In a woolen three-piece suit, with bronzed skin and a proud eagle nose. Let me give you a ride, get ready. My car will arrive any minute now. His appearance and insistence caught me off guard. I processed the words for a couple of seconds. I had become so absorbed in my book that being abruptly pulled out of its reality felt like experiencing the bends. The conditioned divers suffer from when they surface too, quickly after diving to great depths. My voice sounded muffled and distracted, as though it had lagged behind me and remained partially submerged in the depths. Thank you for your concern, Yosef Moisevich, but it's unnecessary. I will take public transport. I knew this would be quite an inconvenience for the dean. I didn't want to put this kind man at unnecessary risk. The dean threw up his hands and was clearly about to launch into an argument with an unexpected sense of carelessness on my part, but I smiled, confident in my choice. It's all right, really. I'll make it to the guarded route. The elderly Jew looked at me attentively, then at his watch, and deciding not to waste precious time, he sighed. Take care of yourself, Pavel Viktorovich. Have a safe trip. And to you, Yosef Moisevich. Sorry for making you worry. The dean left the lecture hall, taking with him the atmosphere of exotic Middle Eastern refinement. His footsteps echoed in the corridor, and I, removing my glasses, rubbed my eyes. It was astonishing how absorbed I had been in reading. I had once again lost track of time, but this time I had done so shamelessly. There were indeed only about 15 minutes left before sunset. I left the lecture hall, locked the door, and headed to my office. The empty corridors slowly began to turn fiery crimson, and a lump formed in my throat as the anxiety gradually grew. Entering my office, I started sorting through the closet full of various junk, old textbooks, confiscated student belongings that, as it turned out, were of no use even to them. Trash that should have been thrown out long ago. Ah, here it is. I found an old military bag, the one I had packed just in case I stayed late. I strapped on an officer's saber, threw the bag over my shoulder, and headed to the foyer. My company consisted of the echoing footsteps and the dust particles twisting in the beams of light filtering through the corridor windows. I was glad that none of the students would see my combat-ready appearance. A professor's jacket didn't quite go with an officer's saber. In the foyer, there was a loud metallic clanging. Marya Fyodorovna, a broad-shouldered woman in her early 40s, was putting on her enchanted chainmail. According to the duty regulations for a hall porter, she did this swiftly and skillfully, not concerned about the noise disturbing anyone, since all reasonable people were already at home behind their 7 silver bolts, having salted their thresholds. In institutions, reasonable people usually reside. Inside the building, of course. Nothing threatened her, but as they say, the rules are written in blood, and if it's stated in the security regulations, then one must kindly follow them. Marya Fyodorovna! I nodded friendly at the grim porter. May I use the phone? Why are you still here, Professor? The woman rummaged in a cabinet, grabbed the phone, and carried it to the little booth window, constantly adjusting the cord so it wouldn't get tangled in the furniture. Got caught up in my reading. I smiled awkwardly, knowing the porter wouldn't consider this reason worthy of risking my life. She once had ventured into the night forest to save her grandson. She couldn't, but the mere fact was enough. Got caught up in reading, huh? She growled and set the phone at the booth window. You need to get to Sputnik, right? To the countryside. That's just only a 20-minute bus ride, Marya Fyodorovna, don't dramatize. It's just a minor inconvenience, nothing serious. My tongue wagged, not calming anyone with the social patterns, while my fingers dialed the familiar home number on the rotary. Pasha, is that you? The best sound in the world. My wife's voice came through the receiver. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a sudden surge of confidence. It was as if the smell of freshly brewed tea, pastries, and cutlets had reached me. Her hair, a bunch of wormwood hanging in the hallway. The lump in my throat intensified, and I had to clear my throat to speak with assurance and speed. Lyolyochka, my dear, forgive me. I'm running late. Everything's fine. I'll go to the bus stop now, catch the bus, and pay for the guarded route. I'll be home in about 40 minutes. Lyolyochka, like I had been earlier, was caught off guard by my insistence. Well, if you say so. Yes, darling, don't worry. I've got the bag. Make me some tea, would you? I'll have dinner at home, I promise. All right, Pasha, safe travels. Thank you. I'll see you soon. I hung up the receiver, filled with determination to get home no matter what, but the experienced porter shattered my confidence, as easily as cracking a sunflower seed. The guarded routes are canceled. How's that? I was taken aback. I've been on it for 2 months now. They sent the security guards to the Slava Peruna collective farm. They've been there for 3 days now. I have a relative in the security, that's how I know. Hurry up, Professor. I nervously nodded, gripped the handle of the saber I had strapped on, and dashed out onto the Institute's porch. In the square in front of the building, an old janitor was sweeping the pavement. The broom and dustpan were gathering a few stray leaves, some sticks from ice cream, and a wrapper from the Vorozea candy. I quickly descended the steps, called out to the old man. Abay Nurlebekovich, what are you doing? It's getting dark. The janitor turned, squinting his already narrow eyes, and smiled widely. I'll sweep now. And tomorrow I'll be able to sleep in a bit longer and take Victory for a longer walk. What about you? Got caught up in reading. With every justification I uttered, I felt more foolish. Lost track of time. Hurry up. The janitor didn't stop or judge me. If you miss the bus, you can take my shed. Thank you, Abay Nurlebekovich. I shouted as I ran past. The deserted square and completely empty streets. The wind carried a newspaper page, surely fleeing from the janitor. I ran with all my might toward the bus station, trying to take shortcuts wherever possible. Forgetting my academic degree and dignity, I climbed over fences separating the yards of the 5-story buildings, crossed lifeless roads and prohibited places. Once a police car passed by at full speed, and the mustached officer in a metal helmet frowned and wagged his finger at me, as though reprimanding a careless youth. But in essence, my action was typical for such people. A foolish professor, a foolish book, a foolish mistake. A few more turns, and I, breathless from running and anxiety, appeared in the square where the bus station was. Over one of the stops, a green flag with the inscription Fast Departure waved in the direction to Sputnik, the town where I lived. A queue had formed at the stop, which made me feel calmer. Selfish joy that I wasn't the only one foolish and short-sighted. These people, too, for some reason, found themselves in danger. I immediately felt ashamed of my earlier smugness. Approaching the stop, I flushed, greeted the people. They responded with grim nods, preoccupied with their dark thoughts. I bet they all thought, will we make it or not? Will we have dinner at home, or will something have dinner with us? I'd certainly prefer the former. Who's the last in line, comrades? A pregnant woman sitting a little further on the bench gave me a shy smile. You'll be behind me. With a squeak and a groan, an old bus pulled up. The driver and conductor, large men clad in thick, rusting armor with gaudy patches welded on, resembling clumsy robots from a movie. They walked around the vehicle, closing the windows with metal shields that had narrow slits. The workers smelled of sweat and machine oil from afar. No wonder, with such uniforms, walking around from morning to night. The men were switching the bus to night mode, with enhanced security. Everyone knew this would last a while, and that it was very important. I and my unfortunate companions watched the final strokes of sunset with melancholy as the sun dipped below the horizon and the swift twilight began. I hadn't been at this station in a long time. Usually organized and punctual, I rarely missed the bus, which is why I wasn't a regular on the night shifts. A colleague, Timofey, used to drive me to Sputnik, and I would take the electric train back. His station was on the outskirts of the city, a 20-minute walk away. There was light on in the nearby grocery store. It was rare, but if the shopkeeper lived in the same building or nearby, he could afford it. I remembered I had promised Lyolia I'd buy apples. She wanted to make a charlotte and compote. The bus workers were calmly and leisurely handling the protective plates, instilling a sense of safety in the passengers. There was still time. I headed toward the store, located nearby behind a small park, though how could one call it a park? It was just a patch of land about 5-6 square meters, a few trees and a couple of benches. As I crossed the green area, I noticed an unusual city dweller, a cat sitting under a elderberry bush. A very serious gray fellow was watching me with yellow eyes. For some reason, I was convinced of its gender, though I had no proof. It had been a while since I'd seen stray animals. On the night streets, they become the first victims of evil forces. And while the police quickly recruited all the stray dogs to serve, the cats, due to their total untrainability, were left to fend for themselves. The store greeted me with coolness and the puzzled gaze of the seller, a short, sturdy Caucasian man. He had already finished counting the cash register, judging by the wooden, grease-stained receipts, and was putting on a light jacket. "You're late, my friend. I'm closing up already. I won't keep you, please." A kilogram of apples and 100 grams of doctor's sausage. I handed him the shopping bag, unsure of myself. The Caucasian nodded, considering the selection acceptable, took the goods and, picking out large red apples, chuckled. "100 grams of sausage, that's barely a bite." I saw a cat in the park. Need to feed it. The man gave me a quick glance but didn't say anything. He weighed the fruit in my bag and then added a carton of milk and a solid chunk of sausage, which had been thoughtfully cut into small cubes wrapped in newspaper. "On my account, dear. Say hi to the cat for me." I nodded in thanks and went outside. The cat was sitting in its usual spot, watching me approach. I unwrapped the newspaper with the treat and laid it out in front of him, but the animal didn't budge. I poured some milk into a jar lid lying nearby and stepped aside. The cat, seeing that all the offerings were laid out and that the annoying human had stepped back to a proper distance, began to eat with regal dignity. "If everything goes well, I'll probably eat less gracefully when I get home tonight. And I am a professor, mind you." The bus honked at the station and I hurried to the stop. The tall conductor stood by the door, punching tickets for the passengers. The joints of the armor creaked mournfully from the deliberate movements of his hands. A mother with 2 school children, 3 farm workers, a man in a checkered jacket, and a pregnant girl were behind me. "Where's your gun?" one of the farm workers asked loudly. "No gun. There's a torch," the conductor replied, his voice thick like porridge from under the helmet. The man showed a piece of pipe resting in metal thigh holsters. The pipe was smoking lightly and occasionally emitted sparks. This was an old design from the early days of the war. It was adopted for service about 200 years ago, and they stopped making it 50 years ago. Not that it was completely useless, but now there were better weapons. "Torch?" People whispered and glanced at each other nervously. "Where's the gun? Where's the firearm? Or is it enchanted?" "All the guns were issued to the guard. They need them more," the conductor muttered as he punched another ticket. "Ever heard of Slava Peruna? What are you scared of?" The driver, a man with sharply curled mustaches, called out from the cab. "Everything will be fine. We've been driving this route for years and nothing's ever happened." "Shut up, old man, you'll jinx it," the conductor growled at his partner, but the driver just winked encouragingly at the schoolboys and disappeared into the cabin. The sliding panels with rebar screeched as they closed. The cabin was securely protected. The bars faintly glowed with the symbols of protective spells. The passengers boarded the bus and took their seats. The conductor, grunting with effort, slid a thick iron plate to close the door. The bus tilted noticeably, but the stabilizers kicked in, and it slowly leveled out. "Reminder, we're going to Sputnik. There will be one stop, the final one. When we stop at the gate, it's not a stop. You can't get off. We'll occasionally exceed the speed limit. According to Amendment 2963B, for night rides." The man muttered a rehearsed speech, something about special rules for night driving, and how passengers should help in case of emergencies, adding to the tension and provoking dark thoughts. I settled near the viewing slit in the armored window. I don't know why. I've been on night rides before, but in guarded ones, with armed soldiers and machine guns on the roof. I felt safe then, but now I wanted to test my nerves and looked out the window. For most of the time, I could only see roadside bushes in the moonlight, but on one turn, I unexpectedly locked eyes with 2 corpses. They were standing off to the side of the road, in relaxed postures, as if they were men taking a break after haymaking. Men just like any others, only pale. But when I locked eyes with one of them, I lost sleep for a week. A wild primal terror overtook me. This creature was not human, not even close. Something alien and categorically brutal. Intelligent and hostile. Something wearing a rotten red suit. Something using dead bodies as a spacesuit to move in a foreign atmosphere. I was covered in goosebumps and painfully pinched myself to return to reality. I didn't need to psych myself out. The bus gently rocked back and forth, and we drove through the deserted streets of the city, my gaze drifting to the barred windows of the 5-story buildings. People inside were in comfort, warmth, and safety, going about their business. They were spending time with their families, having dinner, not thinking about death. Oh, that damn book. But then my conscience pricked me. The book was good, and it was hardly at fault for its high quality. It was my fault, not the book's. I had gotten deeply absorbed in the story of brave geologists going on an expedition, the romance of field life, the description of the northern taiga, the feats of the iron spirit of the Soviet man. The bus slowed and stopped, and I pressed my face to the viewing slit again. We had stopped at the gates. The city was surrounded by a wall, some parts made of sharpened logs with runes, others with concrete blocks where no magic was needed. Here, at the city's exit, the wall was 2 human heights tall, made of white bricks. Soldiers were on the watchtowers. Engineers turned on spotlights to check if they were ready to operate all night. The driver left with one of the soldiers to fill out some documents, loudly arguing with the serviceman, while my gaze wandered, eager to distract itself from grim thought. Near the guardhouse was a small shrine, a green patch of grass in the sea of concrete. Several idols glowered with oak, eyebrows from the dim, greenish gloom between the trees. Thunder god Perun, mighty Svarog, and strangely, Simargl. The lips of the idols were gleaming from freshly applied blood. Fed before every sunset, maybe they would show mercy and grant us a safe journey tonight. The driver returned and started the engine. The large gates creaked open, and the sergeant gave loud commands. The bus left the city, and I grabbed my military bag with one hand and my saber with the other. The bus swayed as we drove, darkness outside growing. The farm workers boasted and encouraged each other with jokes, while the mother of the school children recited protective spells. The driver's voice rang out, "Don't worry, comrades, we'll be passing by Slava Peruna soon. The security battalion is stationed there, a serious force. They'll inspect the farm and watch the road so it's safe here." The conductor glanced at the farm worker who had asked about the weapon. "There, even my gun is with someone." People settled into the left side of the bus near the windows. They were ready to peer through the viewing slits to see the armed soldiers. The city's defenders quickly stretched to 20 minutes, and I had never listened so intently to the steady hum of the engine. "There, the gate's already!" The driver shouted into the cabin. The bus smoothly rounded the corner, and for the brave ones looking outside, a grim landscape appeared, illuminated by the moon and bright stars. Several military trucks were parked in a line. A tall wooden fence surrounded the farm, guarding the entire perimeter. The high, sturdy gate stood wide open, and not a soul. No lights, no movement, not a living soul. Realizing that there were no guards on the road or at the gates, the driver stepped on the gas. The bus jerked forward, slowly picking up speed. Outside, the dark silhouettes of trees flickered by, but the passengers no longer looked out. They tried not to. The air filled with cold and unease. The farm workers fiddled with their axes and exchanged grim looks. "Dusha!" A worried shout came from the cab. The conductor stood up from his seat and stuck his head into the driver's cabin. They argued quietly for a moment, and the bus began to stop. Hey, why are we stopping?" The passengers yelled. "Calm down! According to the order, there's an injured soldier on the road." The conductor hurriedly lit an incense burner, his voice sounding confident, but at the end it cracked. "I'll go take him and return. Then we'll move on." "You're risking the lives of civilians." A man in a checkered jacket protested. "You're supposed to ensure our safety." The conductor lit the incense, and from the metallic ball on the chain, thick smoke rose. "According to the order," the man in armor thundered, "if you want to dispute the commissariat's decisions, file a complaint." No one wanted to dispute the commissariat's decisions. The conductor strained and pulled the lever. A mechanism creaked, and somewhere, with force, a puff of steam shot out. The smell of moisture and machine oil filled the air. "Will you manage alone?" asked the pregnant woman quietly. The conductor froze on the steps of the bus, one hand holding the incense, the other grasping the sparking torch pipe. "I'll help," I heard a voice from somewhere inside me. It seemed like a foreign voice, and the offer seemed idiotic. The passengers looked at me with pity. The conductor nodded silently and stepped outside. I drew my saber from its scabbard and followed him. My legs moved like mechanical joints. Reality was hard to grasp. According to the order, anyone with medical knowledge and skills was required to assist the wounded soldier. As a staff member of the Institute, of course, I had them. The night air, fresh and filled with the scent of meadow grasses. The warmth and smell of gasoline came from the bus's body. The conductor, cautiously creaking in his iron uniform, slowly moved toward the figure lying by the roadside. The outline of a human silhouette was visible, and the green uniform was distinct. Definitely a soldier. I walked a distance behind the conductor and thought, why did the bus stop so far away? Why not drive up close? Pull the person in and that's it! The coward in me was short-sighted. Of course, no one was sure if this was a real person, so the conductor followed protocol. He stopped 10 steps from the body and began swinging the incense. From his ironclad body, a deep voice began a rhythmic prayer to the gods. The soldier's body shifted. He raised his head, a man about 30 years old, with severe wounds on his cheek and back. "I'm human, he weakly whispered and, likely remembering that any pleading would be futile, joined the chant. The conductor, striding forward, began to incense the soldier, while I, circling from the other side, crouched down and examined the wounds. The situation was dire, but there were chances. I took out a first aid kit from my bag, a bottle of enchanted water, and a grenade, laid them beside me, and started stitching the most urgent wounds. The smoke from the incense not only had its main purpose of driving out evil spirits, but also had an analgesic effect. So I worked quickly, not thinking about the comfort of the injured soldier. He was asleep. Meanwhile, the bus pulled up closer and the collective farmers poured out of it. Nervous, with axes at the ready, they stared into the bushes by the roadside. The conductor finished his prayer and began, quietly instructing the collective farmers how to carry the wounded man. I had just a couple of stitches left when I heard a rustle behind me. Despite my academic title, I didn't think long. The grenade landed in my hand with the same speed with which I later parted with it, throwing it over my shoulder without even turning around. I rushed at the wounded soldier. There was a rumble from behind. The air became hot, dense, viscous. Someone picked me up and dragged me. My legs rearranged themselves, and my hands were looking for support. Finally, they found the handrail. I fell onto the bus seat. I was pushed in the shoulder. One of those who was carrying the wounded man accidentally touched me. The roar. The conductor was closing the heavy door. Someone was shouting, and I think someone was laughing. I wiped my forehead from the damp, unpleasant sweat. The palm was covered in blood. I was already shaken apart at the entrance to the village. A woman, a mother of school children, gently patted my shoulder. "Man, wake up, we're on our way." I opened my eyes with difficulty separating reality from what I dreamed. He touched his head and felt a bandage on his forehead. "It's okay, just a skin incision. I've bandaged you up, but you'd better see a doctor. I'm not an expert." The woman shrugged her shoulders in embarrassment. She could barely contain a smile of relief. It was awkward for her to smile next to two gloomy collective farmers. "Will you tell me what happened? I only remember how the grenade exploded." "The ghoul was sneaking up on you," the conductor muttered. I just turned my head at the rustle, and I saw that the grenade was already flying, and he caught it with his face. "It's gone off!" His pig face flew in all directions, but immediately two more jumped out of the bushes. I hit them with a torch, shooed them away slightly, and the men dragged you and the soldier into the bus. I just didn't save Vaska. There was another knight sitting on the roof of the bus. Vaska gets on the bus, gets up on the threshold, and the ghoul grabs his head and runs into the woods. "Well, that's it. Then let's go." The prescription is the same. I looked around at the passengers. There are one fewer collective farmers, so that's who Vaska is. "I'm sorry," I muttered hoarsely. The collective farmers nodded gloomily in response. The bus creaked merrily through the lighted streets. There were already machine gun towers here. They saw a patrol on the side of the road. A stockade loomed in the front viewing slot. I remembered the smell of crumbling logs, the smell of safety. The bus stopped at the gate. The driver reported to the attendant. The guards examined the bus from the wheels to the roof and took away our wounded find. Outside the gate, the bus stopped and opened the doors, letting us out to enjoy the time allotted by the gods. The passengers, some relieved, some with dejectedly hunched shoulders, got off on solid ground and scattered to wherever. The pregnant girl was met by men, apparently her husband and friends. An old man was waiting for a woman with school children. Those waiting swore at those expected. Why were they delayed? Why did they take the risk? They swore lovingly, but not seriously. I hurried home. I lost my bag and saber, but I didn't regret them. I was glad that I was alive. But I didn't forget the bag of apples on the bus. I was only 2 blocks away from home. I was walking down the street and shamelessly staring into the bright windows of the 5-story panel buildings. People are drinking tea, warm, reading books, laughing, safe. I'll always remember. I won't be late again. It was as if I was spitting out the accumulated nerves and fear. I was already approaching the house when I noticed a recent acquaintance at the trash can, a gray cat that I was feeding at the bus stop. Of course, it couldn't be the same one, but it was very similar. I wanted to go up to him to examine him, but he crouched down and hissed predatorily. Obviously, this comrade did not want any close acquaintances at all. I understood all the aggressive hints and walked around him in an arc. Something bumped in the dumpster. Maybe the cat's accomplice was looking for food. Meanwhile, the gray continued to hiss furiously, approaching me as if defending his territory. chasing me away. Or as if warned, in gratitude for the food. I felt cold inside. No, it can't be. What a ridiculous fantasy. I was just worried, that's it. A bald, knobby head covered with gray, flabby skin peeked out of the container. Faint embers flickered in the depths of the empty eye sockets. The next second, I hit the back of my head on the asphalt, and the ghoul pressed me with his unexpectedly heavy and cold body. His slimy, icy hands tightened on my neck. I held out my hands defensively, and the creature happily began to gnaw on the left one. With a hiss, the cat clung to the ghoul's muzzle, and it did what I so fiercely dreamed of. It howled loudly in pain. The grip of the palms relaxed. The ghoul began to tear off the cat, which bit into the opponent in earnest. Help, help. I was wheezing with a sore throat and hardly anyone could hear me at least 5 steps away. But the howl of the ghoul was definitely heard by many. A shot rang out and the ghoul lost his arm. On the 3rd-floor balcony, an old grandfather in family underpants was reloading a Mauser rifle and desperately cursing the entire demonic tribe. Nearby, somewhere behind the nearest 5-story building, a patrol whistle sounded. The creature threw the cat away from itself and decided that it would have time to have a quick snack before someone serious came for it. I was crawling backwards as if it might affect something. Another indistinguishable movement, a gray stroke, and his teeth tear at my neck. I really wanted to lose consciousness like on a bus. Rewind the traumatic experience. I could feel his vile fangs tearing off pieces of what was also, in a sense, me. Armed men ran out of the houses. The grandfather in underpants continued to fire, but he could not repeat the success of the first shot. The ghoul detached itself from me and howled. Again. This time the cat decided to scalp the enemy. And surprisingly, he did it. He slashed the monster and pieces of gray dead skin flew to the sides. The ghoul was spinning like a bundle, trying to throw off the animal. Gunshots rang out and several streaks of light pierced the monster's body with a hiss. The ghoul fell to the asphalt, shaking slightly. Men ran up to the trash can from different directions. They dragged me to the entrance, and the ghoul was surrounded by a security patrol. People clad in cast iron armor quickly and habitually dismembered the monster's body. I was brought out of my stupor by the disgusting smell of ammonia and the sweet smoke from smoking herbs. I was sitting bandaged up on a bench at my entrance. Leolia was busy next to me, and the neighbors were busily smoking, discussing what had happened. The commissioner was squatting in front of me, just throwing out a cotton wool with ammonia, when I finally managed to focus my eyes on him. "How are you, Pavel Viktorovich?" "It's hard to say. Alive, it's already good." I tried to smile, but it turned out that the tight bandages were covering half of my face, neck and collarbone. I was naked to the waist, and the rags that had previously been my shirt and jacket lay like a cake soaked with blood. A pile of half-rotted flesh, bone fragments, and teeth gurgled and gurgled by the trash can where everything happened. What used to be a ghoul. Next to the remains stood the magus, a man in a hoodie made of thick fabric, on which strips of tin with stamped spells were sewn. The magus brandished a censer and muttered his witchcraft prayers over the remains of evil spirits. On the balcony, grandfather, who had so successfully shot off the creature's limb, complained about the times and called on the terrible Perun to turn his eyes to the ground. Guards in cast-iron armor slowly moved around the courtyard, searching all the dark corners. "I'm sorry, Pavel Viktorovich. Any situation of this kind is my personal mistake. I assure you that all the walls are currently being checked for breaches, and the sewage system is being inspected by specialists. Come on, Comrade Commissar. These creatures will crawl everywhere. It's my own fault that I wasn't armed." And without a whistle, the security officer nodded vaguely, asked me a series of incoherent questions, wrote something down and left, advising me to sleep more and drink plenty of fluids. The magus rarely whispered over my wounds. The pain receded, as well as the need to visit the hospital. Then it will heal itself. They let me go home. Dinner was out of the question, so I lay down on my bed and just lay there soaking up the comfort of home. The smells, the warmth, the life. Lelia, of course, cried all night, then scolded me, then showered me with kisses. I wasn't defending myself from either, much less the other. I was just quietly glad that I was falling asleep at home, with my wife in bed, instead of cooling off on the street, tormented by a nightmarish creature that shouldn't exist at all. The night did not torment me with nightmares and memories of the horror I had experienced. I slept immersed in a saving unconsciousness. The blessed nothingness has been a healing force for my soul. I woke up when it was already dawn, and the birds began to gently warm up with the first, not always successful trills. A frying pan hissed and sizzled in the kitchen, and the smell of fried eggs and sausage spread. A gray cat, my savior from yesterday, curled up in a warm ball by my shoulder. And I suppose our pet now. A thunderstorm was gathering outside. Perun answered the old man's pleas yesterday. Soon, streams of water from the sky will wash away the blood that stained the asphalt. Soon thunderbolts will fly from heaven, and everyone will find the rotten heart of the revived dead. Each flash of lightning will mean that the world has been cleansed of another monster.